Welcome back to another video. This one I had to do because I very often say that the law should equate with common sense. But the story that I've been sent today seems to negate what I usually say, in that I don't think this reflects common sense at all. Now, no disrespect intended to the police involved in this situation, but I think this is one of those cases where a little bit of discretion should be had for what is really the greater good. Because in this case, there wasn't really any nefarious or criminal intent at all. Allow me to explain. So in this situation, a 76-year-old driver from Walsall in the West Midlands was fined £100 for allowing an ambulance to pass on the A52. Now, as always, there's a little bit more to it than that, so I'm going to read a little bit from the Derby Telegraph, and I'm going to link the story in the description below so you can form your own opinions yourself. But I'm going to give you some of my thoughts at the same time. Now, in the article, he says that he was driving home after attending his cousin's funeral when he saw an ambulance with blue flashing lights approaching from behind. Understandably, according to the article, he pulled over to allow the ambulance to pass. This was on the A52 Grantham Road, and it was approaching a traffic light junction, which is where it caused a problem. Essentially, it was the merging of two lanes, and he said that he didn't want to get in the way of the ambulance, so he slowed down to allow it to pass. Otherwise, he would have been stuck in front of it, because he said that the lane moves into a single lane up ahead. And obviously, if he carried on, then it would have been a single lane, the ambulance would have been stuck behind him, and the ambulance would not have been able to get past. Now, with the huge concern over the NHS and ambulances and people needing desperate help of late, this is obviously a fairly prevalent story. Now, according to the story, whilst he pulled over to allow the ambulance to pass, there was another vehicle following the ambulance close behind, which prevented him from immediately following on behind the ambulance. He had to allow that car to go as well, and then he had to follow along. All of this resulting in him going through the red lights 1.2 seconds after they turned red. Now, just to make the point absolutely clear, the law does not permit you to go through a red light or to break any other rules of the road or anything like that just to allow an ambulance to pass with blue lights, or police or fire for that matter. The law does not allow you to break the law or to go through red lights in order to allow those things to happen. All it says you should do is to pull over safely if you can do so to allow them to pass, but without breaking any other rules. But this is where, in this particular situation, it seems that common sense says that this has just occurred because he's trying to do the right thing. He's pulled over to allow the ambulance to go past. Another vehicle has followed through, and then he sort of felt committed to going through, even though he was sort of 1.2 seconds after the lights had turned red. He says in the article, a split-second decision on his part caused him to go through the lights after they turned red. But he was distracted because everybody was overtaking him. He just wasn't looking at the traffic lights. He was looking at them in the rearview mirror whilst they overtook. And of course, he went through the lights. And just as I sit recording this video, I remember another video that I did about a clip where a vehicle went through a red light 15 seconds after it turned red. Not to mention the however many vehicles went through 1, 2, 3, and 4 seconds after it turned red, but 15 seconds. And these clips were sent to the police, and the police did nothing about it. They didn't even send out the letter. And so because they didn't send out the letter, they were out of time and they couldn't follow it up anyway. So I would put this to any police officer that is pressing this chap for going through the red light 1.2 seconds after it turned red because he moved out of the way for the ambulance and then followed it and the other car through the red light. Admittedly, that is technically wrong. With the comparison as against this clip, which I'm going to show you now that I've just dug out of the archives, because I archive every video that I've ever produced. I'm going to compare it with this video out of my archives where I explain why I think this is pretty terrible. With this vehicle going through the red light 15 seconds after it turned red. Watch this short clip and then we'll come back to my analysis about this video. This video, just like many that you guys sent to me, although I don't get time to show you them all, demonstrates extremely poor driving in complete contravention of a red light. The police on this occasion were simply not interested in doing anything about it, to the extent that they didn't even respond when they were sent the footage. Let's watch the clip. So although you can't quite see it yet, this is a cue for temporary traffic lights. You'll see it turn red in just a moment, and there it goes. 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5, 6. "15 seconds later, this car drives through the red light, having overtaken all of the cars queuing up for this red traffic light, temporary traffic light, because this car was frustrated at waiting in the queue. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, this clip was sent to Staffordshire Police, who didn't even respond, having received the footage, thus clearly not interested in doing anything about it. But if you zoom in on the clip, you can quite easily read the number plate of the vehicle. Now, bearing in mind, as I say, this vehicle was caught 15 seconds after the red light, and the chap in the current video is being fined for going through the red light 1.2 seconds after the red light, not to mention all the other vehicles that went through at least 1 or 2 seconds after in that clip. I've just shown you we're talking about 15 seconds here, and not to mention all of the occasions where stolen vehicles have been tracked to another location and the police weren't interested in going to retrieve it, and people trying to retrieve phones that have been stolen and tracked to another location, and police didn't want to turn up for that as well. Let's go back to the discussion on this chap who's being fined for going through the red light 1.2 seconds after it turned red. Now, he says despite explaining this to police, he's been required to attend Nottingham Magistrates Court on the 14th of February if he wishes to dispute the punishment. He says in the article, "They're not listening to what I'm explaining happened. It's going to be expensive to drive over there in fuel alone, to have a day in court, just to say exactly what I would say in a letter, what I've already said to them." He says it was one of those situations that you had to make a decision about, and I was 1.2 seconds too late going through the traffic light. Now, let's not conflate this with situations where drivers jump the traffic lights because they're just that little bit too slow to go through, but they just pinch a bit because, after all, it's only a second, right? But what happens when the other drivers beat the traffic lights, as in they go off before they turn back to green and they pinch a second as well? Now, as I've heard police officers say this in court before now, if everybody pinches a bit, that's when we get collisions in the middle of the junction. That being the case, and that being correct, that is where drivers jump the traffic lights on both directions and you get this mishmash of judgment on both sides and we end up with a collision in the junction. Of course, that is wrong, and of course that is why these red traffic offences should ordinarily be enforced fairly strictly, fairly robustly, and with suitable punishment there too. However, as I said at the outset of this video, this perhaps, and you will let me know in the comments what you think, this perhaps is one of those times where some sort of discretion should be considered, because after all, in this driver's mind, this 76-year-old driver's mind was contemplating the ambulance going to help somebody, and he decided to pull over to allow this ambulance to go past. And it just so happens that it was tailed by another car, and that just caused a momentary lapse in judgment because he followed suit and went through the lights, not realising, because he hadn't really realised that the lights had turned back to red and it was 1 second or so over the red light. Now, let's not forget that if anyone else was at that junction on the other direction, facing red, just about to turn to green, many people might say, well, what if they did the same thing and jumped a little bit early on the lights? Well, let's not also forget that they would have been sitting stationary, should have been paying attention to the road, should have, and ideally would have, seen the ambulance coming through with the blue lights and presumably the sirens as well, and therefore should have stayed put. So all of this should really have been a nothing event, albeit yes, he was 1.2 seconds late over the red light, and technically, as I replied to the email for the kind viewer that sent me this story, is technically guilty of going through a red light and contravening a red light traffic signal. Technically, yes, he's gone through the red light. But if you also watched my video on speeding earlier today, there are, in speeding cases, what we refer to as special reasons. That might be special reasons that you were speeding. Somebody, I think in an email, asked me, would it count as a special reason if the ambulance couldn't come to you because of strikes, perhaps, and you were taking somebody to hospital and therefore speeding because you wanted to get there on time? Now, of course, that doesn't amount to a full defense because it isn't a defense. There is no legal defense to speeding. But it might well be a very good argument for special reasons and therefore mitigate any punishment you get. So many of you might think that this is one of those situations with this red light, where it might be a very strong mitigating circumstance as to why he went through this red light, because after all, he was trying to do the right thing. Of course, everything I'm saying here cannot be taken as legal advice, certainly not by the chap mentioned in this article or by anyone else that's caught up in this situation. It's merely discussion. It's merely raising these questions as to whether or not, when I say the law should make sense, it should equate with common sense for the most part. There are some situations where common sense is not quite in tune with the law, and the law says this is how it is, whether common sense prevails or not. This is what the law provides is allowed or not allowed, regardless of what anyone else thinks. However, as I say, you might well think that this is one of those situations. Let me know what you think in the comments. So there's no judgments, there's no conclusions here. This is all up for discussion, and this is what I really think this should be. There should be someone on the bench in the magistrates who takes all of the circumstances into account, which is going to be the case, which is what magistrates do when these cases come before the bench. The bench will take all of these circumstances into account, and hopefully, if this chap doesn't have representation, hopefully the bench will take that in mind and listen to what he's said. And even in this article, this chap says there are circumstances when you need to do something which may not technically be correct, but on the other hand, it's the correct thing to do. And guidance, according to the article from East Midlands Ambulance Service, states that if a driver hears sirens, they shouldn't panic, and if the road is congested, they should look to see if there's any space and move over when it's appropriate and safe to do so. So I suggest that if you're approaching traffic lights at the time that they are changing and you pull over and somehow that means you go through a second or so over time, then it's just one of those difficult situations where no one intended to do anything wrong. And indeed, he says that he's had a clean license for many, many years. So surely that's going to go into mitigating circumstances as well. So, of course, anyone in this situation, and including this driver, is welcome to take this as guidance, but you cannot take this as legal advice. But if I were the barrister defending a case like this, I would be making all those kinds of arguments. Clean license for so many years, doing the right thing, the heat of the moment, and let's not forget that any incident like this, whether it involves police, fire or ambulance services, they are considered to be an incident involving police, fire or ambulance because someone hears the sirens, they see the lights and they take an action based on what's happened. So all of the above will be mitigating circumstances, in my view, as guidance, not as legal advice, to anyone that faces those situations. So if you've seen that story, particularly the chap that sent me this story today, and anyone that's in a similar situation to this, I hope that's useful. I hope it makes sense. Perhaps you agree that that's the analysis that one should take. Let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know how that makes you feel. Please do remember to like and subscribe to this channel because, as I've said a few times now, around 60% are not subscribed to this channel, and yet I aim to provide you all with free legal guidance on this channel. I aim to provide videos every day. Somebody asked me yesterday, I think, said without being rude, when do I find the time for these videos? Well, it's all sorts of times of day. It might be in the middle of the night when I wake up. It might be batch recording them on the weekend. It might be like it is now. It is literally 5:30 on a Thursday, just before I'm about to release this. So I decided to release this now. I am recording it, I will edit it, and I will publish it. So I appreciate every one of you subscribing and liking this video to share it with a wider audience. This is truly my passion now after so many videos and years that it's been. And thank you all for 260,000 subscribers. And thank you for watching.